welcome to The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Sunday, June the 28th, 2020.
Stonewall Inn, like almost all underground bars that catered to gay clientele at the time, was run by organized crime. But the LGBTQ community in the late 60s had few other options.
How important was this place to you and your friends back then?
Well, it was important because we could dance with each other. Remember, it was against the law to serve known homosexuals alcohol in New York City.
The last week of June 1969, an increasingly impatient NYPD raided the Stonewall multiple times. And on Friday, June 28th, its oppressed clientele, many transgender, minority, or poor, had enough.
Did it feel like every other raid that you had experienced up until that point?
No, because the neighborhood cops always raided the bar, and they would walk in and say, "All right, girls, line up." And we'd line up as usual, but they came in nasty, hollering and pushing and shoving, and they hit somebody, and somebody hit back, and that started the whole thing.
At times, the Stonewall riots were actually lighthearted, but the underlying anger also sparked outbursts of violence. The officer who led the raid spoke to Today in 1994.
You must understand that these were kids who were out for a good time, and we spoiled it.
And then what happened when you came out here that night?
After that, they broke the windows. We threw garbage cans through the window. We fought back. We shaked police cars. We broke paddy wagon locks.
Police presence and LGBTQ resistance persisted for several nights, with dozens of arrests and injuries. The NYPD shut down the Stonewall Inn for good, but a movement was born, and the struggle for mere survival or acceptance pivoted into gay pride, held on the anniversary of the uprising. The building itself changed hands and businesses for decades, before its current owners stepped in with an eye on preserving history.
It wasn't being treated with the respect it should have been. This is where pride began. So we had to bring it back to that status. We didn't want to make it a museum, but we also wanted everyone to know the history.
That history is still being made. Stonewall has transformed into a mecca and a sanctuary. For mourning, like after the Pulse massacre, and for celebration, like after the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage.
Yeah, to some degree, this has become, for the LGBTQ community, a kind of emotional ground zero, isn't it?
Absolutely. It really has become that symbol of gay rights around the world. We get visitors from everywhere you can think of. And I think when you talk about Stonewall, it resonates now because people are understanding exactly what happened here.
Tree, who was a customer at the Stonewall when the uprising happened, is now a bartender here and a living piece of its history.
I was very proud that I'm here. It's my second family, my home, and here.
In 2016, President Obama named the area outside the Stonewall a national park, the first to recognize the LGBTQ community. Pride is now a worldwide celebration, a community of millions of individuals, but its spiritual birthplace is this corner in New York's West Village.
This is a place where people can come to mourn. It's a place where people can come rejoice. It's a safe haven for everybody. The straight allies also.
It's a piece of history. It's part of an education.
We don't take it lightly. We understand that we're the innkeepers of history, and that's a big responsibility.
On today's episode, Happy Pride Day. A look back and a look forward at gay liberation in the United States, and a look at some of the touchstone heroes, sheroes, everyone's heroes who have pushed the movement for gay liberation and for the trans community, not only into the mainstream, but everywhere where we all can identify, can support, and be not afraid of our brothers and sisters. Champion, ally, respect, and fight for the cause of gay liberation and justice and equality not only in the United States, but everywhere around the world. This episode is about gay pride and about figures in history who have been activists for gay liberation and justice. That's coming up next. Welcome back. They are known as the Stonewall Riots, but I would call them the days of the Stonewall Uprising. After weeks and months and years of harassment by police, 51 years ago today, in a small bar on Christopher Street in New York City in the West Village, a group of lesbian, gay, and transgender individuals fought back against the continuous police bullying, violence, and harassment that they faced continuously. This would be a movement that would continue on for a good few days, 4 or 5 days, with the Stonewall Inn the epicenter of that very movement that said that no longer would gay people be stepped on, mocked, ignored, taken for granted, attacked, that those attacks would end, and this would be a symbol of resistance in the United States and the beginning of a movement that recognized, respected, and no longer excluded or marginalized people who were gay, people who were transgender, people who were queer, people who said that I am who I am, and without apology. The police had attacked the Stonewall Inn, which was a haven for gay people, as you've heard in that report there from NBC News. Stephanie Gosk was the reporter. And the Stonewall Inn had been a place of safe haven for gay people, for the LGBTQ community, welcomed them. It was their home. It was their environment of comfort and joy and conversation and fun and freedom in a homophobic world, a world that was terrified, a straight world that was terrified of gay people. The bigotry against the gay community has persisted in this country and has persisted in nations across the globe. Russia, in particular, has had and continues to have a stridently anti-gay posture, a repressionist posture against the gay community, jailing people, discriminating against gay people. This was one of the reasons why many athletes here in the United States and elsewhere refused to go to the Olympics, I believe the Winter Olympics that had been there a few years back, in protest. As a straight man, I don't know what it is like to be a gay person. I can say this. I identify, however, with their struggle, the struggle of a movement. Indeed, the gay rights movement, as have a number of movements, been, quite frankly, modeled upon the civil rights movement that preceded it. And there was no one who could identify and understand both of those movements better than Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was an African-American activist and civil rights leader who was one of the closest lieutenants to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And Bayard Rustin was also a gay man. Rustin was a pioneer in the gay community, and he was also someone who was a respected and legendary voice in the civil rights era. There were certainly people in the black community who expressed levels of hostility at best to members of the gay community. And in some ways, there are still people in some parts of the black community, particularly in the clergy, who display a very hostile, or at least certainly less than welcoming, posture towards people who are gay. That is something in the black community, or aspects of the black community, that have to come to an end. The homophobia, the bigotry against gay people. And it must end in all communities. In the white community, the Asian community, the Latinx community, and in all the other communities around the world. The fear must end. The homophobia and the attacks on gay people must end. There is now, I think, a real reckoning that is happening in a number of communities. A real reckoning. As we today celebrate Pride, celebrating an uprising against the homophobia and the repression and attacks on gay society. And who better to pay homage to in this moment, on this Pride Day, 51 years after the Stonewall uprising in New York, than this young man.
My name is Harvey Milk, and I'm here to recruit you. I'm tired of listening to the Anita Bryans twist the language of the Bible to fit their own distorted outlook. But I'm even more tired of the religious leaders of this nation who know it and remain silent. I'm tired of their silence. And I'm tired of the John Briggs talking and lying about false role models. He's lying in his teeth and he knows it. Anita Bryant and John Briggs' unwillingness, their unwillingness to talk about heterosexual violence, their unwillingness to look into their own house. For if the John Briggses win, they will not stop. They are mad, and the Hitler types must continue to prove that they were right. They don't stop. You must remember that gay doctors, any gay person who has any kind of license is in danger, and the Holocaust will begin. Gay people all across the state. The Brits can only be defeated if each and every one of you comes out to everyone you know you must. And finally, join me in this message. Jimmy Carter, listen to us. You want to lead? You want to be the world's leader in human rights? Well, damn it, lead! There are 15 million lesbians and gay men waiting to hear your voice. We are coming out of the closet. When are you going to come out of yours? How many more years?
Harvey Milk. Harvey Milk in 1978. Harvey Milk was the first openly gay member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and may have been the first openly gay politician in the entire country that we are at least aware of. Harvey Milk was an unabashed champion of gay liberation, gay rights, and freedom. An activist who was tireless in his efforts to get the United States of America, straight America, to open its eyes and stop being so repressive and end the discrimination against gay people and accept them. Harvey Milk wasn't pleading for it. Harvey Milk was demanding it. He was a revolutionary figure in this country. Somebody who was a champion of the underdog. And he also aligned himself with the civil rights movement. He spoke about liberation for black people. He spoke passionately about it. That's something that isn't often said about Harvey Milk, but it is very true of Harvey Milk. An inspirational figure, a leader. Harvey Milk, sadly, and that speech was in Los Angeles in 1978, but sadly, that very same year, in late November, he would be assassinated by fellow supervisor member Dan White in San Francisco, inside City Hall. In fact, so would the mayor. San Francisco Mayor George Moscone was the other person who was killed by Dan White in that year of 1978. It was a monumental loss for the country, for San Francisco in particular. And Harvey Milk's loss was a monumental loss for everybody. The gay community felt it the hardest, and they were hardest hit by his assassination. Today, Harvey Milk remains a beacon of light, hope, encouragement, inspiration, and someone who represented the pursuit of justice and happiness and liberation for gay people everywhere. He had a profound effect on the gay rights movement. He was someone who brought the movement out of the closet, if you will. But he was not the only one. There were other activists as well. And I'll be talking about one or two of them right after this. Welcome back. This next voice that you'll be hearing from is this next voice that... Welcome back. The next voice that you will hear is that of Sir Ian McKellen, the actor, author, and activist who talks about being gay and talks about the fight for gay liberation, justice, equality, and respect throughout a very bigoted, homophobic world. Here are a few minutes from his 2017 address before the Oxford Union in Oxford, England.
And then there were three girls on my right. Tough little sassy 16-year-olds. Just out of uniform. Yeah. And the one in the middle said, "Now, look here. I'm talking on behalf of these two. We're bi." Good. But she said, "Look, if I'm with my boyfriend, presumably I'm straight, am I? And then if I'm with a girlfriend, presumably I'm lesbian. We don't want these labels." And a light went on in my head. Of course. Why do we have labels? The only label any of us needs is our name. We don't need labels, really. LGBTQI. Where's it going to stop? Don't have labels. We're just people. Don't make any assumptions. Even if you see gay on the label, or queer, or other, don't make any assumptions that that'll be the same next week. People may change. They may want to identify themselves in another way, or behave in another way. Yeah, that's what life's about, finding out. So, that's now my message to school. Get rid of the labels. But I get so excited to be British because it's our country that have some of the best laws in the land protecting the rights of everybody to be whatever they are and put whatever label they want and not to be discriminated against. It's against the law to discriminate against people on grounds of sexuality in a state-maintained school. Bullying on those grounds is illegal. Has to be dealt with. And teachers who spent a whole generation of their career following the obscene rules of Section 28, which said you may not discuss sexuality positively in a state-maintained school, that is past. Now, we've not quite got there. Anyone from Northern Ireland here? Well, you can't get married in Northern Ireland if you're gay. Haven't quite got there yet. And one of the political parties who resisted changing the law, as they should have done, of course, was the DUP. And without the DUP, our present government wouldn't be in charge. So don't look to Northern Ireland for immediate advance for gay people. But with the exception of that, our laws are superior to any others that I know. And attitudes are changing with them. Of course, gay people are still bullied in private and in public places. They have acid thrown in their faces. They get tripped up. They do, in extreme cases, get killed. But, on the whole, you can't say anything anti-gay in a public place without being reprimanded. Quite right. Yet you go around the world, Russia, under Putin, with the encouragement of the Orthodox Church there, who have been so repressed for so long under communism that now they want nothing more than to repress other people's lives, have passed a law which could as well be called Section 28 because it has exactly the same wording and makes it illegal throughout Russia to speak positively about homosexuality in the hearing of anyone under the age of 18. So the law of the land in Russia is that young people should be kept ignorant about the real world, kept ignorant about themselves, ignorant about the sexuality of their brothers, their sisters, their aunts, their uncles, their friends, people in high places, people in low places, people probably running the bloody Orthodox Church. They've gone back into the Middle Ages. Don't let anyone tell you Putin is a good, strong leader. Strong, maybe, good. I just come back from India. They're trying to change a law which disadvantages gay people and says that we're inferior and we shouldn't be allowed to do certain jobs and so on, so on, so on. And some politicians said, McKellen, don't come over to us and tell us how to run our country. We have our own Indian laws and don't come over with your Western attitudes. And you say, no, it's not your law. It's a law that the British Empire imposed on you and left behind. Before the Empire, there were no anti-gay laws in India. We introduced them. I said, I've come here to apologise and take it back.
Sir Ian McKellen at the Oxford Union in Oxford, England, in a speech on gay rights, the conditions of gay people, and laws discriminating against them, and the continuous fight to eradicate anti-gay laws, and the continuous fight to achieve justice for people who are gay, people who are lesbian and transgender as well. Liberation for queers, liberation for all groups. So Ian McKellen is a longtime activist, a gay man, an actor, an author, somebody who has stood up for gay liberation and gay rights and justice for many a year. I got to meet him in San Francisco a few short years ago. And to a group of us, as part of a San Francisco Film Critics Circle meeting, he spoke to us and talked about gay liberation and issues that gay people were facing, the discrimination that they were facing. And I remember speaking to him and saying stuff to him, and I can't quite remember what it was, and he corrected me. And he did it in a way that was clear, declarative, and made the point that you're not quite right about that, young man. I remember when he said that. I just wish I remembered exactly what it was that he corrected me on, because I don't remember, honestly, what it was I had said as well to warrant the correction. But I will never forget that moment, as well as everything that Sir Ian McKellen had to say. And he continues to this very day to be a profound inspiration to all, and someone who has lifted the conscious and the consciousness and the conscience of straight people. And I think that Sir Ian McKellen is one of the great inspirational people dedicated to a cause that we all should be dedicated towards: equality and justice for all people. Intersectionality is very important. We live in a world of intersectionality. And as I've often said, we must stand for each other. not against each other. We must stand for each other, because we cannot always just stand alone. If we stand alone without standing together, it will be a harder fight. But sometimes you have to stand alone, as people at Stonewall did 51 years ago today. Sometimes you have to stand up and be counted. If you are even the only one in the room, then maybe that is what you have to do. If you are the only one in the room who is willing to stand, then do so. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up and be counted. You never know who will take cues. You never know who will be inspired by you. But your voice will soon be joined by others who have the courage to stand. In 2020, there is still vast discrimination against gay people, even though there are some profound headwinds that have resulted in some very important Supreme Court decisions over the last 5 years. I'll be talking about those, and you'll be hearing from one or two voices in the fight for gay liberation, and also the fight against violence against Black transgender people. All of that is coming up right after this. Welcome back.
Why are you here today? Darling, I want my gay rights now.
That's when I started my little writing. I wanted to get into this fabulous little dress and this fabulous little hairdo here and learn how to do makeup and come out. Because I found out that my body was worth the money in those days. I found out if you're a pretty boy or a pretty little transvestite, you can make a couple little dollars, and that's when I learned how to hustle. And then I found out the prettier you look as a little boy, or the prettier you look as a little boy made up as a girl, that's the most money you're going to make. And the best way to do it is with your own natural hair. Wigs and stuff like that were in the 60s, but the ones that used to make the most money was the boys that looked like girls and could wear their own hair with just a little bit of makeup and have a little hormone tits, because that's when the girls' hormones start coming out in the 60s, just before the Stonewall riot. And people were just starting to really get into it.
That was Marsha P. Johnson, an African-American transgender activist. Marsha P. Johnson is one of the great and legendary figures of the transgender and gay movement, and made a profound impact on it in the very short period of time that she had lived. There's a great documentary about Marsha P. Johnson. She served as a touchstone for the liberation of transgender people, particularly Black transgender people. And she has inspired countless people today, such as Janet Mock, and a number of other individuals who are inspirations. She is one of the unsung figures, quite frankly, of the LGBTQIA movement and of that community. One of the most unsung, but she is known well. But I don't know that straight America knows her as well as they should know her. And in an era now where violence against black trans individuals, particularly black trans women, has escalated to a very disturbing level, to the point at which the murders of black trans women have become an epidemic in this country. We need to start demanding the end right now to these murders of black trans women. And we need to begin to start saying right now that black trans lives matter. There have been a number of black trans women over the last year or two, at least 25, if not more, who have been killed in the United States of America by police, by people in the community, or outside the community. One of the killings was of Tony McDade by police within the last 2 or 3 years. We must never forget Tony McDade. We must never forget any of the black trans men and women who have been killed in this country, and we demand justice for each and every one of them. They are our brothers and our sisters. Today, gay liberation isn't only about gay liberation, it's about the liberation of people who do not identify themselves. They call themselves they or them. People who do not gender identify whatsoever. It's important to acknowledge and recognize that movement as well, of people who do not identify. They are non-binary in terms of gender. They do not identify with either gender. We need to begin as a nation, but particularly in our straight community, need to open our eyes and our minds and yield not to fear. And we need to open our hearts and welcome people who are gay, transgender, queer, or non-binary. It seems ridiculous to even have to state the obvious, but in 2020, you do have to state it, because you do have to remind people. This is not about tolerance. It's about respect. It's about justice. It's about peace. And it's about humanity. On this Pride Day, there's still too much fear in the world. Still, homophobia lingers. And it doesn't just linger. It is outward. And it is very prevalent still. Despite the gains through the Supreme Court that we saw this past week or so ago, when, as you may have heard, the Supreme Court ruled that gay and transgender people cannot be discriminated against. There is still a tremendous backlash against the members of the LGBTQIA community. There is still violence perpetrated against those communities. And 5 years ago, a landmark Supreme Court decision gave us marriage equality for gay people who are able to marry. So while the Supreme Court in recent years has been more of a friend here in the United States to people who are gay, people who are transgender, people who are lesbian, people who are queer, there is still so much more progress and work to be done to eradicate the transphobia and homophobia that still exists in the United States and still exists in many countries around the world and in people around the world. You heard Sir Ian McKellen talk about Russia, as I had talked about Russia earlier in this episode. There are still a number of countries on the planet that regard being gay as a crime, as an actual crime that is punishable by jail time or even death. There are still countries on this planet that have laws like that on their books. There are still families all over this world who will disown, including here in the United States, who will disown their own children if they ever were to find out that their own children were gay or transgender or queer or non-binary. This is something that is still a very prevalent problem, to say the very least, in this country and around the world. So as we celebrate this happy Pride Day, this gay Pride Day, the acknowledgement and the respect and the celebration of gay people, the accomplishments of the gay rights movement and the continuation of it, and the liberation of Black transgender people, as well as gay people across the spectrum. And bisexuals and queer people as well. It is important to realize that there's still a lot more work that has to be done. And in the name of that kind of work, we have to activate our consciences to do the right thing, to speak up when somebody says something against gay people, to not be silent. That if we believe truly in justice, truly in being better people on this planet, now more than ever, especially now, we must speak up and we must speak out. A few other voices and a few closing thoughts in just a moment. Welcome back.
Hi, I'm Billie Jean King, and as we continue our battle for equality, I tip my hat to the Negro League players. You have won our respect, our admiration, and our hearts.
And you have won our respect and our admiration and our hearts, Billie Jean King. Billie Jean King, the activist, athlete, author, leader, humanitarian. Billie Jean King, of course, also the Grand Slam tennis champion as well, has led the fight for equal pay for women in tennis, and has also, of course, continues to be a gay rights activist as well. She is one of the people that I am inspired by daily. Somebody who stands boldly and fearlessly and continues to fight the good fight for human rights all across this planet, particularly when it comes to gay people and for women as well, in the fight for gender justice and gender equality. Intersectionality, and you heard it in that clip as she spoke about the Negro Leagues. Of course, the Negro Leagues of baseball, of course, were the unsung leagues. They were thriving leagues of black baseball players throughout this country. There is a great book on this called Only the Ball Was White. I've forgotten the author, but a fantastic book, which you must read, about the Negro Leagues. And many of the great Negro League players, in fact, some of them, they weren't even the greatest, but some of them got drafted out of the Negro Leagues into the major leagues, who wouldn't play Negro League teams at all because they knew that they'd get beat. And Willie Mays and Jackie Robinson weren't even regarded as the best players in the Negro Leagues. But Jackie Robinson made it into the major leagues in 1947, the first black person, the first black man to play in Major League Baseball. Willie Mays would come soon thereafter. There was Larry Doby, who was the second black person to play in the Major Leagues of Baseball. Intersectionality is critical, and that is the commonality, the threads that run together in humanity. Some of us are black and straight. Some of us are black and gay. Some of us are white and straight. Some of us are white and gay. Some of us are black and transgender. Some of us are Latinx and maybe queer, or maybe bisexual, or maybe transgender, or gay, whatever. So Ian McKellen said that there are no labels and there shouldn't be, and I actually agree with him. Labels are a way of controlling and categorizing and boxing people, putting them into boxes so that you can control them, so that the dominant society, the people in it that have all the power, can do that. But it is good at the same time to identify yourself unreservedly and without fear, and stand by who you are and be proud of who you are. Yes, this is a repressive society in very, very many ways, particularly for people who are gay. It is an oppressive society for gay people, for black people, for numbers of classes who have been historically and currently oppressed. Women in particular as well. And we have to continue this fight for the recognition and justice for all groups of people. Black people, black trans individuals as well, and many others that this applies to. Now, a few words from one of the legendary people who has been one of the icons of gay America, but doesn't often, I think, get the kind of credit he should in this regard. And some of the greats from black communities were gay. I've talked about Bayard Rustin. Of course, Langston Hughes, the legendary poet. And this man, one of the great activists America has ever had, one of the great writers and authors America has ever had, one of the great philosophers, poets, critics that America has ever had. It's this man. And here, I'm sure you'll know exactly who he is once you hear his voice. A few words from this man.
That's why the South is so panic-stricken, and essentially the country is so panic-stricken about it. It means this. The generation of boys and girls who are sitting down at those lunch counters are the first generation of Negroes in the entire history of America who were not controlled by the Americans' image of them. This is why Montgomery is so demoralized. Little Rock is so paralyzed. New Orleans, people are going mad. If you can find anywhere in the Deep South Negroes, the South has been saying for generations, they know. They know the Negro. You would find them in that town. There was not a Negro in that town, really, essentially, who was not working with some white man. There was really no middle class. There were no outside agitators. These people walked. These people terrified. The town is still terrified because they don't, not even on the obvious level about violence. But if they're not who I thought they were, who are they?
What is this image that you were?
This is precisely what it's so difficult to get down to. But let me try to put it this way. What do you see? I don't know what white people see, when they look at a Negro anymore. But I do know very well that I realized when I was very young that whatever he was looking at, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was something he was afraid of. It was something to which he was attracted or which he found repulsive, but it wasn't me. I was not a man. Now, this image, I don't know what this image is, but it has something to do. It has something to do, I'm convinced of this, with the Puritan God. It has something to do with a peculiar and, I believe, absolutely bankrupt morality under which we all are suffering. The one person who was outside this constriction in fact and historically and in life was this pagan, this black pagan.
It was brought over.
That's right. It was brought over as a chattel to God's country. It seems to me that it's a reflection, a direct reflection of the effort made by the white American to keep away, to not be threatened by black people. In some way, the American vision of the world is all wrapped up with their vision of black men, which has to do with their vision of themselves. Black is evil. The saved are white. Now, there is certainly a thread which connects this reality to which makes it possible for the Secretary of State to say, we will not do business with the devil.
James Baldwin, the one and only James Baldwin, talking about the black experience in the United States of America. He is talking about it back in the 1960s. In fact, from 1960. And he was speaking to a Canadian broadcaster. James Baldwin, again, one of the icons in gay liberation. And the thing is that he obviously was a unabashed champion of black people. And as a gay man, he was also someone who stood up for the liberation of gay people. He has written some great books dealing with the gay rights struggle and gay people liberation, gay people liberating themselves. There's a great book called Giovanni's Room, which some would say is somewhat autobiographical. Giovanni's Room was written by James Baldwin, and it is a book that speaks about the gay experience and from the perspective of a black man like James Baldwin. James Baldwin is one of the great figures in gay history as well as in black history, in all of history. and he should be studied. Just like all of the others, he should be read, digested, and watched. James Baldwin, one of the great icons in black activism and gay activism. Intersectionality. And there's a number of other people who have been strong presences in the movement of gay liberation and activism. Larry Kramer, who, of course, is the famous ACT UP activist. In the 1980s, he led a strong and powerful movement against the homophobic attacks on gay people, and also in the fight to find a cure for HIV/AIDS. There was no more passionate a voice than his back in the 1980s and 90s. An activist who was fearless, who spoke truth to power. Larry Kramer was that activist. And in an unabashed way, he made it clear that the rights of people with HIV/AIDS, the rights of gays and queers, had not only to be respected, but they had to be acknowledged and absolutely dealt with in a strong mission of respect. I'm going to play you just a few of his words from a speech he made last year at the Queer Liberation March. He passed away last month, did Larry Kramer. Here is just a bit of what he had to say in 2019 at the Queer Liberation March.
45,000 of us here today, I am told. Can you hear me? What does pride mean to you? I'll tell you what it means to me. I love being gay. I love my people. I think in many ways we're better than other people. I think we're smarter and more talented and more aware of each other. And I totally do. I am very proud to be gay. I'm approaching my end, but I still have a few years of fight left in me to scream out. To scream out the fact that almost everyone gay I've known has been affected by this plague of AIDS. As it has since its beginning, this has continued to be my motivation for everything I've done. It's been a fight I've been proud of fighting.
Larry Kramer, one of the great activists that America had, should I say. He was fighting for the gay community before it was quote-unquote fashionable to do so. He was often the lone voice back in the 1980s on the issue of HIV/AIDS, which was actually called, quote, the gay plague, end quote. The kind of denigrating, homophobic, anti-gay slur that was regularly thrown at communities of gay people all over the world. Larry Kramer made it acceptable to many people who were gay to be proud of who they were. He instilled that pride in the 1980s and beyond, as you heard in just a few moments of that speech just last year. There are so many people in the gay and transgender community who have impacted the world. There are so many people, some of whom obviously I won't be able to mention because there's so many. And here are two of them. I've mentioned one of them earlier. There's Laverne Cox as well, but here are two others. Janet Mock, I mentioned earlier, and Ellen DeGeneres. Both of whom have been on the front lines. Ellen did it coming out to an entire country back in the 80s or 90s. I believe it was the 1990s, when it wasn't, again, quote-unquote, fashionable. Elton John, back in the day, in Rolling Stone magazine, no less, in the mid-1970s, saying that he was bisexual. And then later on, saying that he was gay. In the times where it wasn't, quote-unquote, safe. Now, over the last, say, 30, 40 years, but particularly the last 20 years, more and more people are coming out of the closet, as it were, declaring themselves. People who are famous and people who are not famous. Coming out as gay or as bisexual or as trans. I know some of these individuals who have done so over the last few years. And there are many that I do not know who have made that brave, bold step. And even now in 2020, it is not safe in many parts of this country, the United States, and maybe in the country that you are listening to this in right now, to quote-unquote come out of the closet. In this world that we're in, straight people like myself don't have to come out of a closet. Because the closet is ours, essentially. And we have systematically oppressed, discriminated against, and quite frankly committed lots of violence against people who declare themselves as gay or lesbian or transgender or queer or bisexual or non-gender identifiers. And as Harvey Milk once said, it's the heterosexual violence that needs to be dealt with, that needs to end. That's a term that we don't hear anymore. That's a term that is not spoken even today in 2020. The term heterosexual violence. Think about that. Here is some of the conversation between Janet Mock and Ellen DeGeneres on Ellen's show. Remember that still today, there is a lot of grotesque backlash and homophobia and hatred directed at gay and transgender people. I've told you about the epidemic of trans women, black trans women, who have been murdered, black and brown trans women who have been murdered in this country over the last year or two. Again, black trans lives matter. Here is just a few moments of a conversation from last year on The Ellen Show with the author, activist, and, of course, director and producer, Janet Mock, with Ellen DeGeneres.
Feel ridiculous, but I just recently became more aware of you. I was listening to a podcast that Oprah does, Super Soul Sunday, and it was one of the ones that you spoke at, and it was unbelievable. It was so incredible, and I said I need to meet her. I don't know why we haven't met before. So thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
You know, I was only able to do that work because of what you've done in this space. You know, living authentically, living your truth. Choosing to take the risks that you took by living your truth authentically, publicly, really laid the groundwork for so many of us LGBT youth that were watching at that time, not knowing that we needed that. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for what you do. I think. Look, we're in a time where people are still confused about even just gay and lesbian people, and then you add, trans people, and they're like, "What does that mean?" I don't know how to deal with that, and so when you say you started, because a lot of it, if you wait too long, obviously you're very feminine, very female, and that is part of like starting early transitioning, right, with hormones and stuff like that. And people who don't start earlier, it's a lot harder. Right.
Yeah, there's so many different journeys, right? Like when you think about it, for me, I was so lucky that I grew up in a place and in a time period where access to that medicine was there. That, I also grew up in an environment where the Native Hawaiian culture has a space to designate for people who are gender nonconforming, who are not necessarily male or female, who may be in the middle, figuring things out a little bit. And so growing up with that consciousness, growing up with that access enabled me to, help before puberty kicked in for me. But there's so many different journeys. There's many trans people who don't want to have, any kind of surgeries or medical access in that way, and some who do, like myself.
So what would you say, because I think, we're hearing about it more and more now, which I think is a really positive thing, because, people need to be seen, and we need for people, especially parents out there that are maybe dealing with this with their kids. A lot of kids, like you said, you knew when you were really young. What if you're a parent and your kid is acting the opposite sex, and you're thinking, okay, maybe they're just going through a phase, or maybe they're just gay, but the kid is saying, no, I really don't feel. I mean, that's a tough place for a parent to be. What do you say to that?
I think the best thing any parent can do is just to listen and to nod. You don't have to think about the 10 steps ahead. Just think about this moment when your kid is coming to you and they've been thinking about this for years, and finally they feel safe enough to come to someone that's supposed to meet them with nurturing and care and affirmation. That's all you need at that time. You'll figure out the steps as you go. My mom was very much, she was like, okay, but at the same time, she also was like, okay, we'll figure it out. Okay, we'll go to the next step. And so I think that the best thing young people could get in a world in which they get the head shaken at them, to get a nod.
Yeah.
And to just listen. And to also go to, resources like PFLAG, that can help you answer those questions with other parents who are going through that, to read some books that are out there in the world, but in that space, your child just really needs you to be open-armed with them.
Yeah, I think it's just, and the reason I ask this, because I think it's a really hard thing for parents right now that are seeing that and hearing more and more kids are going through that. And I think parents are, first of all, a lot of parents are loving their kids conditionally, and they want them to be what they envision them to be. And it's like not supposed to be that. They're supposed to be their own, little soul. But that's a tough place for parents to be. But so you're the first in your family to go to college. And you're this brilliant writer, but you had never worked in television, and suddenly Ryan Murphy calls you and says he wants you to write, produce, and direct on television. And you said, okay.
It was the strangest interview to ever have. First of all, I was on the set of the assassination of Gianni Versace, American Crime Story, and it was a nightclub scene. I just remember there was like a disco ball in the air and like drag queens all over the place and shirtless, oiled up men. And I was like, this is the strangest interview that I've ever been on. But I was like, it's Hollywood. So I came in and he hired me on the spot, and it really just changed my life because I grew up watching television. I'm one of 5 kids, the middle of 5. My mom was a single working mom. The TV was a babysitter, like many people probably watching right now. And so to be able to finally create reflections of myself and my community, reflections and mirrors that I didn't have growing up, has been so deeply affirming and so gratifying for me. And so I just love being able to work on Pose and to tell these stories about these women and these people existing at that time period.
Just a portion of the conversation between Janet Mock and Ellen DeGeneres last year on her show, The Ellen Show. There are so many people who make up a broad tent, if you will. Maybe that term is not the right one to use, but that make up the diverse LGBTQIA community. A broad range of people. Many you know, many you don't know. Many in your family that you may know. People in your extended family. Everybody. We are all part of a community of people. And it is sad that we, in our own families, have the discrimination of family members simply because they cannot handle or deal with a family member who is gay, transgender, bisexual, queer, non-gender conforming. We are living in a heterosexual society and a world. And as I think I alluded to earlier, nobody tells a straight person to come out of a closet. Nobody comes up to a person and asks them, are you straight? Because you are living in a straight world, a so-called straight world, a heterosexual world. We are all living in that world, no matter who we are, no matter how we identify ourselves. We are living in a straight world, a heterosexual world. So that world, you will not find anybody coming up to you or me and asking us, are we straight? That just has never happened in human history. That's the reality that we live in, still, in 2020. There are people you know and people you don't. There are famous people like Rachel Maddow who have been out there on the front lines. But by leading by example, it's not that they have to be out in the streets and wave the banner. They don't have to do that. They live their lives and lead by example. Activism, however, is very important. We have a society that is beginning to progress, slowly but surely, here in the United States. We have gay governors. We have gay mayors. We have gay senators, gay House members. And we will eventually have a gay president. That is what I believe. But besides just the representations of people in power, in cities large and small, in states, in governorships, in the Senate and in the House, the important thing, the other important thing, as well as the fact that we have transgender people in power in various states, in Minnesota, in California, in various areas of the country, that we need to look at the everyday person who is gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, non-identifying by gender, and ensure that their lives are being fulfilled in the way they want them to. We need to be allies. We in the straight world need to be allies. And that's what I mean. That's what I'm saying. We have that obligation. We must do that. None of us are free until all of us are free. I wish you all Happy Pride Day. Thank you for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.